Imagine waking up one morning and finding out that the most American brand in your garage just packed its bags and didn't even say goodbye. That's not a metaphor, that's John Deere. This isn't just another company moving overseas. This is a seismic shift. The tractor that built small towns, won wars on the farm, and defined rural pride is being shipped off to Mexico. And Donald Trump? He's threatening a 200% tariff and drawing a line in the dirt. But here's the real question. Is this betrayal or survival? Because what's happening behind closed boardrooms and fiery rallies isn't just business. It's an identity crisis. What if tariffs are just theater? What if farmers turn on the brand they've trusted for generations? And what if the word American-made no longer means what you think it does? What's happening? Just days after John Deere's announcement, Donald Trump took to the stage at a farmer-focused event and delivered a fiery threat that sent headlines ricocheting across every major news outlet. "I love John Deere," he said, pacing before a backdrop of American flags. "But if they move to Mexico, we're hitting them with a 200% tariff. Everything they ship back here is going to pay." The crowd erupted. It wasn't just a policy statement, it was a declaration, and Trump knew exactly what he was doing. This was not a new move in his playbook. Trump had wielded tariff threats like weapons throughout his presidency. In 2018, it was steel and aluminum. Later, it was Chinese electronics and even Harley-Davidson. He understood how to transform corporate decisions into symbolic betrayals. But this moment was different. Deere wasn't just another multinational. It was a cultural touchstone for the very people Trump claims as his base. In campaign circles, the Deere threat quickly became a talking point. Trump's advisors understood its emotional gravity. Here was a company known for loyalty, now accused of betrayal. What better fuel for a populist fire? The 200% figure wasn't chosen at random. It was designed for shock value, for maximum impact in rural media. It was a line in the sand, drawn with dramatic flair and campaign timing. By using John Deere as a wedge, Trump wasn't just retaliating, he was repositioning himself as the lone protector of American manufacturing. Whether the tariff would ever be implemented didn't matter. The message was clear: choose me or lose your legacy. But while Trump's words echoed through newsrooms and dining rooms alike, John Deere's boardroom was silent, and that silence was deafening. Deere doesn't flinch, and that says everything. While Trump roared, John Deere held its ground with a quiet, corporate precision that spoke volumes. There were no emergency reversals, no defensive press tours. Instead, the company released a calm, unembellished statement. The Mexico expansion would continue as planned. The message was surgical. This was about positioning for long-term success in a competitive global market. Deere's refusal to fold wasn't arrogance, it was calculation. Internally, leadership knew this wasn't their first rodeo with political backlash. In previous decades, when other companies bent under public pressure, like Carrier walking back its factory relocation, Deere watched and learned. They weren't going to make short-term promises that risked long-term strategy. Internal communications revealed a company ready for backlash. Executives anticipated the political firestorm and stuck to their talking points. Less than 5% of total North American production would be affected, and core large-scale manufacturing would remain in states like Iowa and Illinois. In other words, we're not abandoning America, we're expanding beyond it. The tone was unapologetic. It was also deliberate. Deere knows that, in the global arena, survival isn't about sentiment, it's about scale. With aggressive competitors like Mahindra and Kubota nipping at their heels, Deere's leadership wasn't about to be steered by headlines. Yet the refusal to engage directly with Trump's tariff threat sent a message all its own. Deere was betting that markets, not media, would determine the real winner in this clash. They weren't interested in a public brawl. They were busy building factories. And the foundation of that strategy, the real reason this decision was made, had everything to do with hard economics. The economic playbook behind the move. When John Deere executives made the decision to open a new manufacturing facility in Ramos Arizpe, Mexico, they weren't chasing headlines. They were chasing leverage. From labor costs to logistics, the math was impossible to ignore. In the United States, a skilled manufacturing worker can earn upwards of $25 to $35 per hour, with benefits and union protections. In Mexico, that cost drops by more than 70%. Over time, the savings are in the tens of millions, but wages were only the beginning. Mexico offered something even more valuable: logistical freedom. With port congestion, U.S. shipping delays, and unpredictable domestic labor shortages, Dere needed a faster, more flexible way to meet demand, especially in booming agricultural markets like Brazil and Argentina. A strategically located plant in northern Mexico brought Dere closer to those customers and gave them an edge their rivals couldn't match. This wasn't a move made in isolation either. Dere studied the playbooks of Mahindra and Kubota, both of which had already optimized global production. Deere's U.S. first model had worked for decades, but the post-pandemic landscape made it a liability. Supply chain fragmentation, material shortages, and rising inflation had redrawn the map, and Dere was adapting. There was also the question of redundancy. In a world increasingly defined by volatility, relying solely on U.S. plants was no longer an advantage. Diversification wasn't a betrayal, it was insurance. So while critics pointed to patriotism, Dere pointed to spreadsheets. This was not about emotion, it was about position. And every line item, from tax incentives to export routes, favored the move. But with that move made, a deeper crisis began to surface, because now it wasn't just about production lines or press conferences. It was about how Americans, especially rural Americans, would react to the fallout. And in the towns left behind, that fallout was already becoming real. We've spent weeks digging through factory records, tariff filings, and investor briefings. If this helps you see the truth behind the headlines, hit subscribe. When loyalty feels like betrayal. For many American farmers, John Deere wasn't just a brand, it was a bloodline. The green and yellow machines weren't simply tools, they were part of the family. Generations of agricultural workers proudly posed beside them in family photos, passed them down like heirlooms, and trusted them the way one might trust a close neighbor. But in the summer of 2024, that trust shattered when John Deere announced it would move key manufacturing operations to Mexico. The reaction in farm country wasn't just disappointment, it was heartbreak. Lifelong Deere buyers from Iowa to Indiana took to social media in waves. Facebook groups that once shared tractor maintenance tips turned into venting boards filled with anger and confusion. On TikTok and Instagram, younger farmers posted videos symbolically covering up their John Deere logos with duct tape, or switching to other brands like Kubota or Case IH. It was a cultural moment, not a marketing one. Interviews with rural small business owners revealed something deeper than brand loyalty. One farmer in central Illinois said, "My grandfather bought Deere. My father did too. This isn't about business anymore. It's about betrayal." Another, based in Oklahoma, admitted he was rethinking his next equipment purchase, not because of quality, but because he no longer wanted to support a company that, in his view, turned its back on America. The backlash wasn't limited to online forums. Conservative talk radio jumped on the story. Hosts on major AM stations called the move a slap in the face to red state America. On syndicated programs across the Midwest and South, callers vented about losing not just jobs, but symbols of pride. For many of them, John Deere wasn't just a tractor manufacturer. It was an emblem of American self-reliance. And here lies the heart of the conflict. John Deere's move made perfect business sense, but to the customers who built its legacy, it felt like erasing history. The cultural memory of a brand that stood for grit and patriotism collided violently with a modern strategy focused on global efficiency. And in that collision, loyalty didn't just crack, it fractured. But it wasn't only the buyers who felt abandoned. The people who built those machines, the ones in the factories themselves, were suddenly left behind too. The factory towns left behind. When news broke that John Deere would relocate some of its production from Iowa to Mexico, the economic aftershocks hit immediately. These weren't just job cuts, they were lifelines being severed in towns that had already been stretched thin. Communities built around John Deere factories began bracing for what felt like an inevitable storm. The factories weren't just sources of income, they were anchors for entire local economies. In Dubuque, Iowa, where mid-frame skid steer and compact track loader production was housed, anxiety spread fast. Union representatives scrambled to get answers. Families worried not just about jobs, but about mortgages, schooling, healthcare, and the emotional fallout of sudden unemployment. For many workers, their connection to John Deere spanned decades. Fathers, sons, cousins, all employed under one roof. One worker, a third-generation employee, told local reporters, "My grandfather helped build this place. Now I've got to explain to my daughter why I might not have a job next year." The consequences rippled outward. Local diners near the factory saw lunchtime traffic thin. Hardware stores and auto shops that relied on factory worker customers began slashing hours. Real estate listings started ticking upward as uncertainty pushed some families to consider relocation. School districts braced for budget hits as parents feared they could no longer afford to stay. It wasn't just about one plant. It was about dozens of satellite effects, dominoes that began to fall the moment John Deere made its announcement. In these towns, there are no quick pivots or overnight alternatives. Factory closures don't just end paychecks. They erase routines, community hubs, and long-held pride in building something tangible. Despite John Deere's assurances that less than 5% of its North American production would shift overseas, the psychological damage was already done. The message sent, intentional or not, was that loyalty no longer mattered, that decades of showing up, punching in, and building America's machines counted for less than a spreadsheet in a boardroom. And when those emotions mixed with national politics, there was one group that didn't flinch and didn't follow the outrage. Wall Street isn't buying the drama. Amid the political chaos and public outcry, the stock market had its own reaction: indifference. John Deere's stock dipped briefly after Trump's 200% tariff threat, but it rebounded quickly, and by the end of the week, it was holding steady, with analysts maintaining a bullish long-term outlook. Why? Because Wall Street doesn't trade on feelings. It trades on forecasts, numbers, and global positioning. And John Deere's strategy, however controversial, was sound. Moving a slice of production to Mexico lowered labor costs, improved access to Latin American markets, and de-risked supply chain bottlenecks. That's not betrayal, that's optimization. Financial giants like BlackRock and Vanguard didn't dump their shares. In fact, some quietly increased holdings. Bloomberg's senior auto analyst described the move as prudent and inevitable. CNBC's midday panel even debated whether other companies would now feel emboldened to do the same, minus the media spectacle. International shareholders, too, shrugged off the backlash. In Europe and Asia, where nationalist backlash was less pronounced, the Deere move was seen as smart portfolio diversification. Global markets don't care about domestic drama. They care about returns. And in that cold calculation lies the real divide. While rural workers and loyal customers were grappling with heartbreak and political machines were turning that pain into talking points, Wall Street was quietly placing its bets. Not on nostalgia, not on slogans, but on the company that had just proven it was willing to take heat in order to win the long game. But that divide between emotional reaction and financial reward is exactly what's fueling the next stage of this story. Because if John Deere can survive backlash from its customers and shrug off threats from a president, what happens when other companies decide they can too? And that's where things start to spiral. What Deere did loudly, others are doing quietly. Deere simply said what every CEO has been thinking for years. Staying loyal to one country in a global economy is no longer viable. What makes this moment historic is not just Deere's bold move, but the silent stampede it may have triggered. Executives from other manufacturing firms, speaking off the record, have admitted that Deere's Mexico expansion validated decisions they were already contemplating. Industry associations have held urgent closed-door meetings, trying to manage what one insider described as a coming wave of offshoring dressed up in different clothes. The common concern among these firms? If they move like Deere, they risk political retaliation. If they don't, they risk becoming irrelevant in the global marketplace. The calculus is brutal: compete or collapse. Recent data shows a surge in corporate land acquisitions across Mexico, Vietnam, and Indonesia. These deals are not being trumpeted on earnings calls. They are being quietly slipped into long-term strategic roadmaps. At least 4 major U.S.-based machinery and parts manufacturers have expanded supply chain infrastructure in Ramos Arizpe since late 2023. When pressed by reporters, company spokespeople give vague answers about flexibility and redundancy, careful never to say the word offshoring. And while Trump's threats may chill public disclosures, they do not halt internal decisions. For CEOs, the real fear is not a tweet from a politician. It's missing the next efficiency wave while rivals move ahead. Deere's public defiance cracked the dam, and now the quiet current of copycat moves is building behind the scenes. But But if politics and optics once held companies back, that time is ending. Globalization didn't die with the last trade war. It simply learned to whisper. Yet, even as these corporations move to lower-cost countries, there's a more profound force reshaping the landscape, one that no border, tariff, or podium can stop. And it doesn't have a passport. It has a power source. Robots don't pay tariffs. You can't tax a robot. You can't shame one either. And John Deere knows that better than anyone. While the public and political class argue about where a tractor is assembled, Dere is already investing in a future where it doesn't matter who builds it, because the answer will increasingly be no one. In Deere's most advanced facilities, both in the United States and Mexico, robots now handle core functions that used to require entire teams of trained workers. Welding, painting, assembly, quality control. Automated systems now execute these tasks faster, with fewer errors and no coffee breaks. The economic rationale is overwhelming. While the average American manufacturing worker may earn over $25 an hour including benefits, a single industrial robot, amortized over time, costs the equivalent of less than $5. And it never calls in sick. This isn't some distant science fiction vision. It is happening now. Deere's newest factory line near Des Moines uses AI-optimized robots that can assemble subcomponents with sub-millimeter precision. In Ramos Arizpe, automation engineers are preparing to install a fleet of semi-autonomous guided vehicles that transport heavy loads across the floor, replacing human-driven forklifts entirely. The numbers speak for themselves. A recent comparative study found that a fully automated line reduces per-unit assembly costs by nearly 30%, even factoring in maintenance and software. These gains don't just reduce expenses, they increase scale. Dere isn't betting on Mexico alone. It is betting on a world where human labor is optional, which raises a painful question. If we bring jobs back, who exactly are we bringing them back for? The nostalgia trap of manufacturing promises. Deere's decision, while controversial, reflects a broader truth. Even if they moved every single piece of production back to U.S. soil, the majority of those jobs wouldn't go to people. They'd go to machines. A study by Oxford Economics projected that up to 20 million manufacturing jobs will be replaced by automation by the year 2030. That number doesn't represent failure. It represents evolution. Modern agriculture, too, has transformed. AI-driven tractors, autonomous drones, and precision planting tools have made it possible for a single farmer to manage what once required a full crew. John Deere's autonomous ADR tractor, for instance, can operate 24 hours a day without a driver, using satellite data, machine learning, and camera arrays to map and optimize routes in real time. This isn't a prototype. It's already in operation across select U.S. farms. AI is also reshaping logistics, inventory, and field diagnostics. A growing number of farm managers now use real-time crop health data streamed to mobile apps that offer planting recommendations, fertilizer alerts, and even weather-optimized harvest scheduling. It's efficient, it's impressive, but it's not labor-intensive. The sooner we accept that the future of manufacturing is not about people standing at conveyor belts, the sooner we can invest in the skills, systems, and infrastructure needed to thrive. Otherwise, we'll keep promising jobs that no longer exist. And while the U.S. argues over the past, one of its closest neighbors is building the future in real time. Mexico's manufacturing revolution. While America debates where factories should go, Mexico is busy building them. In the shadow of NAFTA's legacy and the supply chain chaos of the COVID era, Mexico has emerged not just as a cost-saving location, but as a serious contender for the global manufacturing throne. The town of Ramos Arizpe, where Dere is setting up its new facility, has become a blueprint for the next generation of industrial cities. Backed by generous tax incentives, cross-border trade access, and aggressive workforce training programs, Mexico has created a manufacturing ecosystem that attracts everyone from automakers to aerospace firms. Monterrey, a few hundred miles north, is now home to tech hubs and logistics clusters that rivals some of the most advanced setups in Europe. Companies like General Motors, Ford, and Siemens have already expanded operations there. Dere isn't leading this charge. It's simply joining it. The reasons are obvious. Proximity to the U.S. means shorter shipping times and less exposure to oceanic freight disruption. Mexican trade policies, especially post-NAFTA and under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, offer stable long-term advantages. And the country's growing pool of technically trained labor means companies can build high-tech products without importing talent. But it's not just about cost, it's about resilience. While American ports remain jammed and U.S. states battle over labor laws, Mexico offers consistency. For Deere, this isn't abandoning Iowa, it's insulating its global reach. Even legacy brands from Detroit are feeling the pull. The advantage isn't just lower wages, it's smarter operations. And if the U.S. can't adapt quickly enough, it risks watching its role as a manufacturing powerhouse slip south permanently. What Deere just did wasn't unique, it was inevitable. It's reshaping the rural political landscape. And that brings us to what those tariffs were really for. Tariffs as theater, not strategy. During his first term, Trump built his brand on these economic strikes. 25% tariffs on steel, massive levies on Chinese goods, a trade war that cost the United States economy over 300,000 jobs by some estimates from the Federal Reserve. But those details rarely mattered in the rallies. What mattered was the story. America was getting tough again. American leadership was fighting back. And tariffs were the punchline. Fast forward to 2024 and the script hasn't changed. The Deere tariff threat is classic Trump. Dramatic, personal, visually explosive. But behind the spectacle lies a hollow center. Experts across the political spectrum agree. A targeted 200% tariff on a single company's foreign-made products is less likely to restore jobs and more likely to raise prices for consumers who rely on Deere's equipment daily. Trade economists argue that this kind of tariff won't hurt Deere as much as it hurts buyers. Most of the manufacturing moving to Mexico involves smaller-scale equipment, which has global demand. Deere can reroute product pipelines internationally. Farmers in the United States, they don't have that luxury. They'll just pay more. And yet, the political payoff for Trump is huge. He doesn't need the tariffs to work. He just needs the fight to feel real. This is economic nationalism as political theater, a show calibrated for rural media, AM radio, and short viral clips. It's red meat in red states. And whether it succeeds or fails economically is almost irrelevant, because the emotional payoff has already landed. But while Trump flexes on stage and Deere doubles down behind closed doors, a quieter storm is forming overseas. Because Deere's decision didn't just change the mood in America, it's changing the map of the entire industrial world. Deere redraws the global map. One move. Global consequences. When John Deere confirmed its $55 million investment in Ramos Arizpe, Mexico, it wasn't just about cost savings. It was about positioning itself inside a tectonic shift in global manufacturing. Because Deere's move set off a chain reaction. And now other industrial giants are quietly reevaluating everything from factory footprints to future investments. Honda has already expanded operations in Mexico and southern India. Ford recently announced new production contracts in Vietnam and Argentina. Caterpillar is increasing its presence in Brazil. And Mahindra, Deere's fiercest tractor rival from India, is scaling up production in Africa. Why? Because the age of hyper-local manufacturing is ending. The new era rewards agility, regional trade access, and geopolitical stability. And America, rattled by tariffs, political whiplash, and rising labor costs, is becoming harder to justify. In Asia, analysts are calling Deere's move a market signal. In Latin America, trade ministers are seizing on the moment to offer fresh incentives to lure more U.S.-based companies. In Europe, German and French industrial leaders see an opening to expand into North America via Mexico's trade gateways. And in Washington, lawmakers are scrambling to figure out whether they just lost the future of farming to a different flag. The global supply chain is being redrawn in real time. Deere's move is not the end. It's the beginning of a long overdue reckoning with where, why, and how things get made. It is not just about labor costs anymore, it's about strategic survival in a fractured world. And as factories pivot, contracts shift, and markets realign, one question lingers louder than any press release. What does Made in America even mean anymore? What does it mean to be American? Now, if John Deere isn't American enough, what company is? That's the question haunting boardrooms, campaign trails, and kitchen tables across the country. In an era where patriotism is worn like armor, and brands are judged as much on flag waving as performance, Deere's decision to expand abroad is forcing a national identity crisis. Because when your most iconic agricultural company starts building machines outside your borders, it's not just about business, it's about what America is becoming. For nearly 2 centuries, Americans equated domestic production with loyalty. A product made in the United States was more than a purchase, it was a pledge. But the economic realities of the 21st century have shattered that illusion. Today, shareholder duty often trumps hometown loyalty. Board members are judged Not by how many flags they fly, but by how many quarters they outperform. And consumers, they're caught in the middle. Surveys show a majority of Americans still prefer to buy made in the USA when given the choice. But that choice is shrinking. Even American brands now rely on global parts, outsourced assembly, and multinational supply chains. American made often means final assembly in the States, but with parts from 12 different countries. The label remains. The meaning has blurred. Culturally, the backlash against Dere isn't just economic, it's existential. What does it mean to love your country but buy foreign-built? To support American workers while using globally sourced tech? Can a brand still be ours if its factories aren't? And now, the rest of the country has to decide which side of that line it wants to live on. What does Made in America mean to you? Drop a comment and subscribe if you want the unfiltered truth next.